Good day, everyone. This is the second last video in this series, Escaping Satanism and the Occult. Today I'm going to look at a writing by Sean Sellers. Now, everyone probably knows Sean Sellers' story, in which he was executed in 1999 for 14 years after. When he was a teenager, he murdered both his parents. Sean Sellers was a Satanist. He started off as following the writings of theoristic Satanist Anton LaVey, and then he went into a more theistic or religious aspect of Satanism. While Sean Sellers was in prison, he renounced Satanism and became a Christian. You can find his personal testimony as well as a full copy of his letter to Satanists at this address. I'll be just reading a condensed version of the letter here today. Again, if you're a Satanist or a dabbler into the occult or thinking about it, then I think you really need to hear what Sellers says in this letter. He starts off the letter with saying, "When I was 15 years old, I became a Satanist. Today, I am 29. My concept of Satan and God back then was so different than what it is today. Back then, I believed God was a creator, but I saw God as sort of an authoritative adult figure. God had lots of rules, and if I didn't obey the rules, then basically I went to hell. I was punished for it. If I obeyed his rules, then I was awarded and went to heaven. That was how I saw God. I saw Satan as a liberator from that authority. Evil represented freedom, and that's what I wanted. Even though it might have been evil, it felt good." You can see the LaVeyic teachings coming through here. Satanism said that not only were God's rules arbitrary, but they were designed to keep us frustrated and controlled. It took me years to fully understand the flaw of that philosophy. It took me even longer to fully understand who and what Satan really was. And he went through several incarnations and transformations before I clearly saw it too. I also saw Anton LaVey's error in his teachings. His error was to see religion as God. He saw some of the untruths of religion and the unfairness of life and decided that there was no God. That was and is our first and gravest error in searching for truth, is that we perceive life through the narrow experiences of our tiny portion of the world. And then we draw our conclusions from it. Everyone tries to force God to fit their own perception. It's so much easier to create your own God. Gods that are fully knowable. Gods of atheism, gods of occultism, even gods of religion. But getting past all of that to see the true and the real God, the real creator of the universe, took me years. No single image that we have of God can contain him, because those images are not God, they're simply empty cups. And this is the basis of everything that the Bible calls sin. It took me years to fully understanding that, wading through all the nonsense. There is a reason for all that God commands, and one reason for them, a very simple one, is that they are all a matter of life and death. A lot of things that we take into ourselves as spiritual things is really just emptiness and death. A lot of these things lead us to a slow death spiritually and physically. Anything that leads to death, that is emptiness, disguised as substance, God calls it sin. And these are the things that he forbids, but not because he's a tyrant, as I first thought, but because he wants us to live. Worshipping an idol, for example, is sinful because it's not God, because it's an empty cup. It may feel like something to us, but it's not, and will leave us destitute inside. I also learned that people reject God for two reasons. Number one, they mistake some aspect of religion as God, like Anton LaVey did. And two, they are unable to overcome their need to fully understand what cannot be fully understood. He says, every Satanist that I have ever encountered has fallen into one or two of these categories. They either have a warped, distorted perception of God based on what they were taught by some idiot, or they just don't believe in the goodness or the existence of a God because of the injustice that they see in the world. The first is a problem of perception, the second is a problem of pride. And both are very hard to get by. The only way to get past those false perceptions in the first one is to have a heart that sincerely wants truth. God has to be sought after, and anyone who settles for and to hang on to an empty idol of perception will never find the truth of who and what God is. Doesn't it make sense, however, that the true creator of the universe is far beyond that simple contrived image of him? The so-called God that Satanism describes is very shallow, simplistic, and downright convenient to their own set of beliefs. Doesn't it make sense that God has to be more than just that? An honest desire to challenge those beliefs and perceptions and seek out more will result in finding that true God. Number 2, that problem of pride is even harder to overcome. When we look at the world and say, well, God can't exist because this thing isn't right over here or that isn't right over there, or we say God isn't just or good because this part of life is totally unfair, what we are actually doing is declaring ourselves to be equal with God. We declare that the world and God himself must fall into the parameters of our own understanding, or it simply isn't so. We declare God can't be good unless I can fully understand that goodness. It has to fit my definitions. That's pride. No matter who we are, our own ideas of good and evil, right and wrong, are skewed to our own personal tastes and perceptions. Imagine a 4-year-old child declaring that you are bad because you make her eat food that's good for her instead of candy, or you won't let her watch TV while Friday the 13th is on there or some movie like that. That's the same thing we do when we judge God because we don't understand the world. Only letting go of that pride and acknowledging our tiny size compared to God's will overcome that. And too often that is the one thing that prideful people can't do. But if you can get past those two things, we can find the true God. A God of power, but a God of compassion. A God of justice, but also of love. A God of fierceness, but also of mercy. He's the creator of the universe, whose greatest desire is that his creation, his children, know strength and goodness, peace, love, warmth, joy, health, and growth, and that we are not left alone, not abandoned, not misunderstood. And because there is nothing bigger than God, the greatest thing God can offer to his creation is himself. True heaven is the presence of God. True hell is the absence of God. Then he says, Satan's desire is to block us from the light and anything that is godly. He is the enemy of humanity. To be cut off from love and light, warmth, and results in death. Satan is the bringer of all kinds of death, spiritually, mentally, and physically. He is the deceiver, and the tempter, and the accuser. To put it in an analogy, God would be a flashlight, but Satan would be a hand in front of his flashlight, blocking the light so you couldn't see it. That's the true nature of Satan. He is the enemy of life. It took me years to fully understand that. A problem with us as humans is that we are flawed. We have within us an impulse to want to do evil, even though we know it will destroy us. We find a pleasure sometimes in evil that appeals to us as much as the pleasure of good does, even though we know that that evil will kill us. That's the only true lure of Satanism. When we get past the lies and the deceptions and the false perceptions of God, all that remains is that pleasure of evil, like the high a junkie feels, but it always ends in pain and death, whether it's ours or another's. To be a Satanist, Seller says, is not to be liberated, it is to be bonded to death. The freedom it offers is an illusion, and this is something I know that every Satanist knows because I was there. In the dark and quiet, all alone, without the buzz of the alcohol and the drugs, or the rhythm of the music to drown out the sounds, there is only an empty echo inside of you, a vacancy, a feeling of lost, cold turmoil and hunger. That emptiness gnaws and hurts worse than anything else in life. We take up knives to carve our skin just to escape it, or run into the arms of some lover to try and smother it, but it doesn't go away. It grows. It is death at work. Emptiness causing decay. No matter how much we feed it sin, it will never be filled up, and eventually it will consume us and destroy us. The only thing that can fill that emptiness is God, Sellers writes, the true God, the God and Christ of the Bible. Finding him takes effort and courage. It requires you to hate the darkness enough to wrench the hand from the flashlight so the light can shine in your life. It may be hard, but you can do it. I did. I speak as one who has traveled this road and has seen the land far and wide. It is my heartfelt prayer that those of you walking this road would see this signpost of my testimony and of this letter, and from it find your way home. Choose God. Choose life. Sean Sellers.